Hello, and welcome to this LRN ICA webinar that is going to focus on the LRN 2024 Code of Conduct report. My name is Tim Tyler. I'm the Vice President of the ICA, and I'm delighted to host today's webinar. And I'm delighted also to be joined for this by Jim Walton and by Subramaniam Najadarian. And I'm going to begin by inviting Jim and Rajan for you to briefly introduce yourselves. Then I'm going to provide an overview of what we're going to cover over the next hour, why it matters, and how we're going to explore the nature of this report that, of course, has just been published. But let's begin with some introductions. And Jim, can I come to you first?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Jim Walton, and I'm Directory of Advisory Services at LRN. I've been at LRN for the past 8 years, leading our Code of Conduct practice. And prior to joining LRN, I was an ethics and compliance professional in-house and compliance officer going back to 2002. And I'm located in the US, just outside of New York City.
Thank you, Jim. And Rajan.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Hi, I'm based in Singapore. I am the Senior Director for Ethics and Compliance with Otis. I've been working in the Asia Pacific region over the past 12 years in the ethics and compliance profession.
Okay, thank you. So let me set the scene as to what we're going to cover over the next hour. We're going to begin in a few moments' time by inviting Jim to provide an overview of this report, just for 10 minutes or so, that I hope will draw out the key elements and bring some structure to the discussion that we're then going to have around some of the interesting challenges that the report discloses. It is important, and we're going to be touching on some really topical, current challenges that we're facing within compliance, like, for instance, the use of artificial intelligence, the regulatory interest in culture. How do we effectively communicate our code of conduct? The generational differences and nuances around how this is being played out, and workplace practice. So there's good reason to continue to join us for the remainder of this webinar. But before I hand over to Jim, can I just say one more thing? And that is that this is being recorded. It's actually in the UK time. This is the afternoon of the 7th of October. It's the morning of the 7th of October for Singapore. And I'm aware that this is going to be broadcast at a similar time tomorrow. So this is recorded, but we've tried to make this as close to contemporaneous as possible. But right up to the event, we are aware of what's going on around us within the world. And of course, we're very grateful for a number of questions that have already been shared by yourselves that we'll look to introduce into the discussion. For now, though, Jim, could I invite you to provide that overview that I mentioned?
Sure. Thanks so much, Tim. So at LRN, one of the things that we do is we do research on issues around ethics and compliance, program effectiveness, ethics and compliance culture, what makes an effective code of conduct. And so we've published 3 reports prior to this code of conduct report, specifically focusing on codes of conduct since 2019. And each of those reports in the past had kind of focused on how companies are doing compared to best practices and also to each other. And there were really interesting findings. We had a lot of interest in those reports, a lot of people downloading them, reading them, asking questions about what it means for them. In this report that we're doing in 2024, we're taking a new approach. So we're going to be sharing best practices because that's really important, and that's what people want to know, what they can do to make their codes of conduct and their ethics and compliance programs more effective. But for the first time, we're going beyond the ethics and compliance community, and we're actually asking employees what they think about their company's codes of conduct and what ways would they prefer to engage with it. And so the users, this is who we're trying to reach. So asking them these kinds of questions. And some of the findings were quite intriguing. Some of them were surprising. There are some fascinating differences between innovations that ethics and compliance professionals are making and companies are making versus what employees are thinking. Significant differences also exist based on geography, industry, level, and generation. So we really hope that the findings from this report, as well as our discussion, will help you make your code of conduct more effective and impactful for your organization. The data from the report was collected from over 8,500 full-time employees, spanning individual contributors all the way up to the C-suite and executive officers across 13 industries and 15 countries. So we have representation from the Asia Pacific region, Europe, North America, and South America. It was also published, or the questions were distributed in multiple languages. So we tried to cover most of the major languages that would be spoken or at least understood in those languages. And the sampling was done in a way to make sure that the groups were all represented in statistically valid ways. So there were 6 key takeaways from the report that I'm going to outline here, and then we'll be digging into a little bit deeper during the discussion period. So the first one is that surprisingly, employees are not quickly adopting innovations that we're making in code of conduct. So, best practices and the trends and the regulators are talking about making codes of conduct, putting them into digital format, making them more accessible, usable on multiple devices, including mobile devices. But employees are 1.7 times more likely to prefer the code of conduct to be in the PDF format, which is something that's been around probably for the past quarter of a century. So only 27% said they would actually prefer a web-based code of conduct, and only 10% were interested in chatbots. And we'll talk a little bit more about these findings in a few minutes. The second finding is that the usage of the code. So do you know how to access your code of conduct? Does your company have a code of conduct? Have you used the code as a resource? They vary pretty significantly by region. So the highest percentages that we found are all in the APAC region. India, China, and Australia are leading. And the lowest percentages were found in European countries, which were significantly lower. The APAC results were in the 40% range, whereas the European countries were in around the 10% range. And actually 35% of employees in the Netherlands reported that they never use their code of conduct as a resource. The third area is in terms of level. So the level that you are in an organization is going to determine how you view the code of conduct. And there's a significant gap. So the senior leaders, 8 out of 10, say that they use the code as a resource, and they believe that their peers also use the code and follow the code as a guide for what they do. This was true for 7 out of 10 middle managers and only 6 out of 10 frontline managers and individual contributors. And this was actually something that was consistent with one of the other reports that we published earlier in 2024, which was our benchmark of ethical culture. We found that the higher you were in an organization, the more you felt that the company was ethical and doing the right thing, and it got lower and lower as you move down the levels in the organization. The fourth finding is that there's a difference in whatever generation the employee identifies themselves with will make a difference in terms of how they view a code of conduct. So millennials and Gen Z are more likely to use the code as a resource than Gen X and baby boomers. But there's a paradox here with our benchmark of ethical culture found that Gen Z employees were 2.5 times more likely than baby boomers to say that breaking the rules is okay if it helps get the job done. So they're reading the code more, but also finding ways to get around it. The fifth was on in terms of work arrangements, and we've seen the rise of remote working and hybrid work arrangements over the past few years, and it seems that the hybrid is really the highest scoring. It outscores in-office full-time and remote full-time in terms of using the code as a resource, knowing how to access the code, and having managers that actually talk about and live by the code. And then the final finding is that the training and awareness are mutually reinforcing. So answering the question, does your company have a code of conduct? And do you use, have you been trained on your code of conduct? Are all in the same, pretty much in the same range. So overall, 88% said yes, that their company has a code of conduct. 6% said no, and another 6% said they didn't know whether they had a code of conduct. Of course, we would like people to say that 100% they know that they have a code and they've been trained on it, which really makes the case for companies needing to do more to generate awareness throughout the year. So those are the key findings of the report. If you've read the report already, that's great. If you haven't, or I would, even if you've read it, I would recommend kind of going back and really taking a look at these and seeing how they impact your organization. Thanks, Tim.
Jim, thank you. There are so many areas contained within what you've just summarized and the report itself that we could focus upon. But I'd like to start by picking up on one of the areas you mentioned earlier on in the overview, and that is quite surprising that there seems to be a preference for PDF and hard copy versions. Just 10% of the individuals that were interviewed showed a preference for chatbots. Only a small overall percentage were interested in web-based solutions. So there seems to be a preference for having something that's tangible that we can either print out or we can relate to. And that's going against the flow to some extent. Can I just begin by asking for your thoughts on that? And perhaps if I can start with yourself, Rajan. How do we understand this? And does this mean that we just say, well, I tell you what, that we'll just do PDFs then, and maybe that's what we should now default to because that's what the research is telling us?
Oh.
I can't hear you, I'm afraid, Rajan.
Oh, yes. Okay.
There you are. There you are. There you are.
There
Okay.
I am. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that is indeed very surprising, actually, that 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3 prefer to read it on their computers or a printed copy of it rather than on a one-touch button. So as it is with the trending and the direction we are moving in, it does appear that most people would prefer with a touch of a button. They just get onto their mobile phone, open it up, and go straight to the code of conduct and start looking at it. And probably with another click of the button, go into that specific area where they have a question which they want to reference. So this indeed is a little surprising that the survey data is showing otherwise, but I would imagine that moving to an online system which is easy to navigate, which is a one-stop platform with hyperlinks, that would really enhance or and probably make use reference of the code of conduct more than a printed copy, which may not be as friendly, I would believe, in this era of internet, right? Um, so that's what I would think more of going online. So this doesn't kind of gel with what I understand it to be,
Mm.
and it does seem like going online and making it easy and higher usability, readability of it, easy reference would would allow more people to reference the code of conduct than just a PDF version is what I would imagine
Mm.
actually. And there are also many benefits to moving to this online system, right? Because we would be able to have data analytics on it to see which section of the code of conduct people are referencing, which are the topics that people are looking into, because this would allow us to see where there may be a higher risk or where there may be a greater need for training moving forward as well, so that it is not so static but a little bit more dynamic in how we uh, we tailor the program to the needs of the organization.
So we can identify that online solutions are certainly for medium and large size businesses, that they are preferable. It offers us something that we can update in real time, that gives us data analytics around where there's particular interest. So if we find within our business that suddenly over a month's period, there's been a peak in people searching on hospitality, or they might even be searching, can I accept bottles of spirits, or something, there's a peak of activity, then of course that's going to give rise to the question, well, why is that? Is there something that we should be paying attention to? And as you mentioned, Rajan, is there a training need? So there's value in doing this, and yet the take up doesn't seem to be strong. Jim, can I bring you into this? What are your thoughts around this? Why, for instance?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. In some ways, at first I was disappointed when I saw this because, we're all talking about it within the ethics and compliance community, and we're seeing the trend. And, LRN obviously has solutions that can help in this area. So we're moving in that direction as well. But I think that the benefit of this coming up is I sometimes when we're, E&C professionals, we have, limited resources, we have limited staff, we have a huge responsibility to monitor and minimize, misconduct across large organizations dispersed all around the world. And so sometimes, we get focused on, okay, we're going to do the next thing, we're going to roll it out, and it's going to be great. But what this points out to is the need to really involve people along the way. So at the very beginning, when we start to think about moving into more of a digital world with our code of conduct and policies and training, we need to start involving employees in the process and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We know that you've been used to reading these on a PDF for many, many years, and you're comfortable with that. But we want to make it so that you can, as Rajan talked about, have instant access to it. Maybe there'll be a poster in the workplace that you can scan the QR code and have the code of conduct pull up on your phone and be able to access the information that you need very quickly. So really trying to bring them along, even doing little demos for them in the workplace and in virtual settings as well. And the other thing I think to make people feel comfortable with it is to help them understand that these technologies will not be tracking them, their identity as individuals, that the data that we're gathering will be aggregate data. It will be using anonymized IP addresses. So, I think there may be a hesitancy to, they're going to know that I was asking about, a question about bribery or harassment or conflicts of interest. And they're going to come after me because they think that I'm the one that's having that issue. And so, giving them that comfort level that that's not the case. Obviously, that would be counterproductive, right? Because no one would go on the code of conduct if they thought their identity was being tracked. So I think it just, we can't put the digital genie back in the bottle. It's here, just as AI is, and we have to really bring people along and communicate to them why we're doing this and how this is gonna help them, and that we're not gonna do anything to harm them along the way.
So just
And
picking up,
Jim,
sorry, Rajan.
yeah. No, I was going to say, Jim, it's good that you mentioned the QR code because I have seen that to work miracles. Employees are excited when they see the QR code on the walls, notice boards, and they scan it, and then it brings them to the relevant website. So it kind of creates an enthusiasm uh, in where then the program works effectively to that extent as well. So yeah.
But one of the challenges that we're facing is building trust. And Jim, you talked about the importance of engaging with our colleagues, with our staff, so that they can see that this isn't a threat. They're involved in the shaping of the code and the way in which it's delivered. They are reassured that their details aren't going to be recorded because they were searching on particular policies. And I think there's another element to this, which is about, and maybe this is, my 20th century thinking that's come into the fore. But I know when I've printed off or I've got a PDF version that I can see in black and white this thing that may or may not have happened, that's right or wrong. It's clear. And if someone challenges me, I can show the PDF and I can demonstrate why whatever it is happened was or wasn't wrong. Whereas if this is somehow incorporated into a machine, which gives me answers, but doesn't necessarily set out the formal definition and description, then we might lose a little bit of trust around that as well. So maybe that's another factor that contributes to this need for trust around the solutions that we develop. Could I broaden this then? And we're thinking about the way in which we communicate the code of conduct, and we've already identified that the good practice is to involve colleagues in the way in which we develop our solutions. Good practice is to use online versions for all the reasons that we've touched upon. But what else can we say is good practice in terms of either the way in which we construct our code of conduct, or, and of course it's linked to this, how we communicate it? Big question, I know. Who'd like to begin on this? So we're looking for good practice, more good practice.
Yes. Yeah. So
Roger.
maybe yeah, Tim. Thanks. I think great question going into the practice of it over here as well, right? So I think on the communication part of it, which personally gets me very excited on that aspect as well, right? So I think we need to look at that much more broadly. Employees on a day-to-day basis, they work more closely with their managers. They have more interactions with them on a day-to-day basis. They take the cue directly from their managers as well. So besides the ENC team communicating and cascading this code of conduct across the organization, I think the good practice is also it coming from the managers. So the managers have a key role in the strategic implementation of the code. Employees need to hear from their supervisors what they think, how they want them to react, to act. At the end of the day, it's the managers who are going to be looking at the performance, the feedback, and engaging with the business as well. So I think it is important that there is very often tone from the top happening, but at the same time, we need to ensure that there's tone from the middle coming in as well.
Okay, then. So if I can pick up on that, Rajan, you're the CEO of a large business. And on this subject, you want to ensure that your managers are properly engaging with their teams on the code of conduct. How are you going to do that? Any thoughts around the practicalities of ensuring our managers are doing the right thing? And this is not an easy question. These are things that we're really grappling with, aren't they?
Absolutely, no. It's a great question. There are many answers to that as well. Maybe if I could just maybe put one or two on the table
Please,
over here
yes.
for discussion. One could be that the code of conduct as it is, right. It is not something that is separate from the business. It needs to be part of the business, right. It needs to be part of the DNA over here. So I think the way that we want it is it doesn't need to be a separate conversation, but it needs to go in together with the business conversation, with the day-to-day activities. And there could be guidance given to the managers on how to incorporate this in their regular meetings and conversations with their respective teams over here, right? And the other another way, right? There are many other ways. And another way may be that requiring the managers to reference them when having conversations or when understanding if a particular approach is right. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is just as we want employees to reference the code of conduct, we need the managers to reference the code of conduct in a visible way with the team so that the team knows that their managers are doing it and this is how it should be done. So two things over here. One is they see the authenticity coming from the managers in how they practice it, and they take away that, hey, this is how it could be done, right? So it is not so much as directing the team to do it, but it's more of practicing it in front of them. It is just like how you would set the right example with young teenage kids as you want to do the right thing, and they learn, not just by you telling them, right?
So a good example might be you were talking about requiring managers to make reference to the code of conduct. A good example of where you might do that is in performance reviews, in setting objectives, is to make explicit reference to the code of conduct. It might be quite general in terms of just simply in a way that is consistent with the values and the code of conduct of the business, or it might make particular reference to parts of the code of conduct that are relevant to a performance objective. Jim, can I bring you into this or any other areas of good practice that you'd like to draw out?
Sure. And I think that, this is kind of also addressing one of the other key findings around the leadership disconnect, because there's a lot of synergy between getting awareness and communication on the code and also getting everyone at all levels to be kind of on the same page with the code. So one of the things that I think about is cascading. Not only the messaging should be cascaded from top to bottom, but the culture also has to be cascaded. So whatever those values are, the core values of the organization around integrity, respect, et cetera, that those need to be exemplified at all levels in all organizations, because managers, you say even at the VP level or the director level, or even, the frontline level, can create a subculture within their sphere of influence. And so while the leaders of the company say, hey, we want everybody to speak up, and we really respect your opinion, and we're going to take your concerns seriously. If you have managers at other levels that are not doing that, then employees they're smart. They'll see, oh wait, you're saying one thing, but you're doing another. So it's kind of a holistic approach. I think you have to have ethics and compliance built into the performance metrics at all levels of the company. You have to do these communications on the importance of the values, the importance of the code of conduct at all levels. So one of the solutions that I've seen companies take on is actually targeting managers with monthly or periodic messaging around ethics and compliance topics. And so, maybe one month or one quarter, you focus on all of the kind of respect and anti-harassment and anti-discrimination and diversity, equity, inclusion kind of issues, and you actually give them talking points on what they can say about those topics, and even encourage their teams to speak up about how do they think this is working within their teams. Another time you may be focusing on all of the kind of information security and cybersecurity challenges that we face. And it's a way of getting the buzz of the organization to be kind of consistent, right? Using multiple channels of communication. So email, publishing articles on the intranet, using digital posters and presentations and videos that can be playing in workplaces, but also be available on the intranet for remote and hybrid workers. So really kind of, focusing on getting everyone on the same page with the values, the culture, and the code of conduct. And as Rajan said, it's not like it's not one time and you're done. It has to be continuous and ongoing and integrated into let's say you have a weekly team meeting. Spend even a minute at the beginning of the meeting talking about, a particular value or some aspect of the code of conduct, 1 or 2 to 3 minutes. But then also having, more dedicated conversations throughout the organization about the importance of ethics and compliance. But again, integrating that into the regular cadence of staff meetings, team meetings, town halls, things like that. It's an all-out effort, but if you're doing a little bit at a time, it's not overwhelming.
Yes,
So,
and if I can
Rajan,
just
yeah.
write, yeah, thanks, Tim. And if I can just write on that, Jim, absolutely. So I think we are moving away and in a space where we may not be able to have 30, 45 minutes of the mind space of someone to pay attention to the training that's been conducted sometimes, right? So it has to be bite-sized. I think that's exactly what you said. Bite-sized, focused, intense discussions probably also, right? But it could be with 4 or 5 minutes more regularly rather than them all consolidated into one continuous space of time after all. And I think those are probably more effective in today's times where people's concentration span is much shorter, and there's so many things happening out there, and fighting for their mind space as well, right? So I think yeah, that'll be fairly effective.
So one of the things that I think is coming from this discussion is that we need to be creative, whether that's thinking about how we communicate effectively, whether bite size or multi-channel, taking a holistic approach so that we don't look at these things in isolation, but we think about the entire organization's culture, the values. And a component of this is the code of conduct, but it sits alongside those other really important areas. And I know, Jim, when you and I were in New York recently, where we were talking about this, there were some really interesting, quite challenging areas of good practice that were it considered. And one, I think, was, and it caused us all, I think, to question, not sure, that's really interesting, but it was certainly innovative. And this is where a company had created a cartoon character. And this cartoon character sort of traveled through a range of different activities within the business, sometimes getting it right, but more often getting it wrong. And so, this became an example of how not to do it. And I think I've got this right. You can correct me, Jim, if I haven't, but they gave this character the name Dave. And over time, the mantra became, don't be a Dave. In other words, get it right, do it properly first time. Now, there might be some risks around this. I think one of the risks might be you might create a subculture where actually people want to be a little bit subversive and they want to be a Dave. But if you can avoid that trap, there's something interesting about the way in which we communicate it. But the bigger issue is we need to be thinking about this, innovative, and that of course relates to wider compliance activities, doesn't it? We're moving away from a rather rigid, binary, flat, two-dimensional approach to compliance. We're having to be creative and think about how do we achieve our compliance goals, which are of course all about affecting behavior, affecting decision making, and so to do that we need to be thinking more creatively and more positively.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a great point. And so what you're seeing now a lot in a lot of the training that that my company is working on, and we're seeing it out in the industry, is using more use of games. So gamifying the training, so giving because a lot of the younger generations are used to playing video games. So make the training more like a video game where people are being challenged at different steps along the way with ethical dilemmas and decisions that they have to make. And they'll score points based on how well they do. They'll their life meter will diminish if they start doing the wrong thing, right? And they can pick up coins and things along the way if they do the right thing. And actually artificial intelligence as well, incorporating that into training, like using it to be more responsive than just kind of a simple binary kind of choice that you can see in certain training, where if you say one thing, then this will happen. Where the AI is a little bit more competitive with you. Like if you turn down the first offer for a bribe, if in the way courses are currently, they'll be like, "Oh, Jim, that's great. You turned down that bribe. You did the right thing." But with the AI, the AI character will try again in a different way to try to see if they can still get you to take the bribe. So it's a little more challenging. And I think that making those kinds of experiences for people more engaging and even more fun. I think the "don't be a Dave" thing is kind of that kind of fun aspect. So it's because it can be very dry, right? And it can be very boring, and employees tend to think of compliance training is all the same. Like they don't really differentiate between, anti-corruption and anti-harassment. It's all the same to them. So making it interesting, making it fun. I think being creative, as you said, Tim, I think is really, really important.
Can I pick up on this AI thing? AI, of course, is part of the conversation now across so many different areas of business. And why wouldn't it be? Because it's opening up things and opportunities that we could barely conceive of just a few years ago. I wonder where the opportunities are for us to be positively, purposefully using AI in this space in terms of our code of conduct. You've mentioned one, Jim, which of course is around how we deliver and shape our training. And that's a really good space in which we can use it. But are there other areas in which we can potentially use AI to reinforce the use of the code of conduct or in other ways to roll it out? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, probably some couple of thoughts from myself to share here. One of the opportunities would be like kind of understanding. I think I mentioned it earlier, right? Using analytical data actually to understand where exactly the high compliance risk actually is, and addressing those areas with direct focused training and having additional questions. So when we go back to the code of conduct and having it online and having it a little more interactive, I think one of the ways that the report actually discusses is having a Q&A as part of the code of conduct. And this Q&A can be a little bit more dynamic and change over time as there's more AI gathered with people going in and the kind of questions that they are asking, the information that they are seeking from it. So the Q&A could be made a little more dynamic so that it directly addresses the needs of the organization over here as well. That could be one. And this would also be important because it kind of touches on the risk management aspect over here, because we are directly addressing where we need to place the resources and the focus at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work going on using machine learning and AI in terms of more on the compliance side. So on especially in financial compliance and fraud prevention. So using it to detect patterns that could potentially predict a potential fraud or potential bribery taking place. So that's a big area in terms of the people that are really involved on the front lines of mitigating these risks for companies. It can also be used to kind of do a document analysis. So when let's say a new regulation comes out in a country where you're operating, you could use generative AI to help kind of summarize what's in that what's in that new law or regulation. Obviously, you want to have it reviewed by a human legal counsel just to make sure that it is correct, but it can help kind of scan pages and pages of documents that are coming out and really help people focus on, what is it that I really need to know and how can I incorporate that into my, into my operations. The other side, the flip side of the coin is making sure that our employees are using AI responsibly. And so things like not putting confidential and proprietary or personal information into OpenAI ChatGPT, for example, sharing customer information, confidential information. So many companies are setting up their own instance of an AI tool like ChatGPT, where it's really walled off from the general internet, from the general ChatGPT. So everything is within a firewall and protected. And so training, giving people training on that, making sure that they know how to use it, they know the proper use of it, making sure that they understand that there can be, it can introduce bias, it can exacerbate bias. So it's a whole other area of compliance now for companies to think about adding to their list of policies. We're starting to see more and more codes of conduct, incorporating some general principles about the use of AI, and they're creating policies around it and training. So there's kind of those two sides of the coin to AI.
Thank you. Before we move on from, and we will in a moment, move on from our thought around good practice and the way in which we engage all staff across a business with the code of conduct. Can I come to yourself, Rajan? I'm mindful that you work at Otis, which of course is that manufacturing or assembly, or it's going to have a substantial number of employees that I'm assuming aren't working at a computer for much of their time. They're working on a production line or a shop floor or something similar. Can I ask, how do you manage the challenge of communicating the code of conduct, sharing it, raising awareness and understanding when individuals may not have any interaction with a computer at all? So how are you proud? And I really don't know the answer to this. I'm very interested to see how do you, because my world is very much office based. So what does that look like for you?
Yes. Thanks, Tim. So Otis is in the elevator industry. So we do have quite a substantial portion of our employees who are out there in the field outside of the office. And the way that we engage them is through our managers and supervisors who meet them and interact with them on a more regular basis, right? Which is why the tone from the middle is equally important or even more important, and what I was speaking to earlier. So that is how they engage them in the conversations. And we also reach out to the employees out there in the field through short messages, right, via email as well, which goes directly to them, which they could take like 60 seconds to just see a video or something. So short video messages which goes out directly to them, and which can be done very easily at the same time. And now this year we are also having them to do an online training, a very short or for a few minutes, an online training actually for the field
Okay.
employee. Yes.
Thank you. It's interesting, though, we come back to think about the role of supervisors, team leaders, and managers. And I think this links really nicely to the point that you made, Jim, around having clarity around what the messaging is, having clear points. These are the key areas that you need to talk about, maybe with a monthly or a quarterly theme to underpin that. Thank you. We've got a few minutes remaining, and there's one area that we haven't yet talked about, which is the question of hybrid versus remote versus face-to-face, present office-based working. And there are some interesting insights that I think came out of the report that links to this. So it's been a little while, Jet, since you spoke. Jim, could I just invite you to remind us what those insights were, and perhaps you could just reflect on those. Does it, for instance, mean that for hybrid or remote workers that the code of conduct is somehow more important? That because people aren't in the office and therefore not part of the water cooler type conversations and so on, that there needs to be other ways in which standards and good practice is communicated. Or maybe that's not the case. But Jim, can I come to yourself on that?
Yeah, this was a fascinating one, and especially because of how timely and topical this issue is. So the really fascinating part of this was that for every question we asked, whether it was, I've used my company's code of conduct as a resource, or I know how to access my company's code of conduct, it's easy to understand, my manager talks about it, my leaders follow it. And for every question, the number one, the highest percentage was with the hybrid workers. So for example, I've used my company's code of conduct as a resource. 67% of hybrid workers said yes. The other part that's very interesting is the second highest is in office. So that was 60%, and the lowest was remote. And that was true for every question. So people who are completely remote are less connected, but people who are hybrid feel more connected. And we talked about this also in New York, and there was a sense that there was an issue of trust, that if an employer is kind of extending trust to an employee to work even part-time from home, that they'll be more interested and excited about protecting the organization's reputation, their assets. So, which is everything that the code of conduct is about. It's really protecting our reputation. How are we seen with our customers and our other stakeholders, and the assets, the time, the equipment that we're given responsibility for. And the idea that the idea that they do go into the office, even if it's once a week or once every other week, they're also then connecting with other people physically. So it's almost like the sweet spot of if you're completely disconnected, you're not really having that experience. And if you're in the office all the time, maybe you're starting to get kind of run down and burnt out if you have a long commute, and so that kind of thing. So that to me was just very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to digging in deeper on that one and finding out what's really going on. And I don't know, Rajan, if you have any thoughts on that as well with your company's experience.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, just hearing you explain and the results there, I'm just wondering if the sense of belonging to the organization may be one of the hypotheses over here for remote employees that may be at the lowest sense of belonging to the organization versus the hybrid, as you have explained, that they know that the organization trusts them to work remotely and come back into office to connect back to the organization. So they have an experience of both working remotely and back in the organization, and they feel that the organization trusts them. So there's a higher sense of belonging to the organization. Probably those are the two extremes of this, perhaps. Just wondering as you
Thank you.
explained. Yeah.
Thank you. And well, you're right, it's topical. We've seen, I think it's JP Morgan, Amazon, insisting on coming into the office for all your contracted hours. Although I was talking to someone I know who works at Amazon Web Services, and they suggested that maybe there's a bigger agenda going on there. Maybe they're looking to, I don't suppose anyone would ever admit this, but it's an effective way to slightly downsize, because some people won't want to stick around for it. But of course, if you do that, you lose control of that at the same time. Okay, we're coming up towards time. I feel there's so much more that we could have talked about. And I'm going to suggest that we've just finished with 2 or 3 key areas that you'd like to finish with. And there may be things that we've already talked about, but just what would you like to leave ringing in the ears of whoever's joining us for this webinar? So can I start with yourself, Rajan?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Tim. I would like to tie it back to the DOJ's guideline on effective corporate compliance program guidelines that they share out, right? They talk about the effectiveness of the program, and how to make it more of a practice rather than something that is on paper. And that is exactly what we spoke about today. How we make the code of conduct more appealing. How do we make it more dynamic, something that people reference to, people make use of it, and how we in the E&C team are going to make use of the data analytics to understand where the real issues lie, where the high compliance risks lie, to circle back to address those components to enhance the program so that it is not static, it is more dynamic. And the way that we roll or implement this out is by getting the managers, the people managers especially, to engage the organization in conversations, as we roll this out and make it more widely accepted, understood, and practiced by the organization. So I think there's a lot of value, um, and I can find a lot of dots to connect between the report over here and the DOJ guidelines as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. That's really helpful. Jim.
Yeah, so just very quickly, would like the participants to really, like to challenge them to really look at these findings, go back to the report, study it, and think about how the findings manifest themselves within your organization, and what are the things, maybe 3 things that you can do to change the way you're doing things, or make improvements to your program based on these findings, that you can implement in the next year.
Thank you. And I'm going to finish, if I may, by just highlighting some of the key areas that we've already talked about, but just reminding us about things that we could potentially take away. And as you described, Jim, consider in the context of our own workplace, how we can make a difference. So we talked about online solutions, the importance of data, and the opportunity to use the data that online solutions give us. We talked about involving individuals in the way in which we develop our programs, so that there is not a democracy, but so that there is buy-in and engagement and contribution from all affected by codes of conduct. We talked again and again about the importance not only of the top, the senior leadership, board and executive and C-level, C-suite level, being engaged in this, but perhaps even more importantly, management, supervisor engagement in showcasing the right understanding, in talking about it in the context of, for instance, monthly meetings or performance reviews and so on. We talked about taking a holistic approach to recognize the code of conduct isn't in isolation. It sits alongside and is part of our culture and values and wider themes within our business. And we've talked about the opportunity to use artificial intelligence in a variety of different ways in order to be innovative, and other ways in which we can be innovative, creative in the way in which we are raising awareness and understanding that will ultimately affect people's decision making. And that, of course, is what we're about. Okay, so I think that brings us towards the close for today. Can I sincerely thank Rajan and Jim? Thank you for joining us today for this conversation, and for all who have tuned in to join us for this webinar. We hope that this has been useful and look forward to meeting with you, perhaps face-to-face or in future events virtually. But in the meantime, do please take care wherever you are and whatever it is that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.